Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. I want to welcome everybody to the second week of the new cycle of the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop. We began when we began a little while ago, we covered some of the things at the beginning of the book, the title page, the table of contents, um, the preface to the first edition, and we ended with an assignment, a call to action, if you will, where I suggested that you find 4 stories at the back of the book, and I made some suggestions about what they should be. And as you read them, ask yourself some questions. 1, do I have a drinking problem? 2, did that happen to me? 3, did I feel like that? And 4, do I believe this can work for me too? So I hope you've done that, because we're going to not take more time on it today. We're going to continue. If you have the study version, excuse me, what we're going to start today is in the study version, which is the forward to the first edition. So if you want to get to page XIII in the 4th edition, and I'll tell you where it is in the study version because it's a different page. In the study version, oh yes, it says the same thing, XIII. Look at that. Okay, the forward to the first edition. Let me tell you a little bit about the first edition. There were 4,730 copies made, 4730 of the first edition. The first edition was published April 10th, 1939. That's the first edition. It says forward, but it's the forward to the first edition. And just a couple of things to bear in mind. Anywhere you see Bill, and I say Bill wrote this. Bill Wilson is the author of the big book. I know he says it's a story of 100 men and women, and we're going to talk later on about this contentious nature of how this book was written. But Bill Wilson wrote the book. And when Bill starts the forward, he uses the word we. And whenever Bill uses the word we, he's talking about the 100, the first 100. He's not talking about you and me. You know, I hear people all the time saying, this is a we program. You see, it starts with we on the forward. That's an interesting interpretation, but that's not what Bill is referring to here, because he says it. And let's start reading it. It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women. There you go. That identifies the we. We now know who we is when Bill says it. But what about them? We have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. You may want to highlight that and underline it. And one of the things we do here is we have color coding for our highlighting. And whenever we come across a reference to recovered or permanent recovery, because people say you're not supposed to say those things, and the book is chock full of those references, so we're going to identify them. We circle them in orange. So you may want to circle that word recovered in orange. And what have we recovered from? A seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And right away, we now have a promise. Please highlight this in pink to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. You may want to circle in orange the word recovered because it appears again. I'm going to suggest you circle the word precisely, because Bill is going to be using some specific terms throughout the book to describe this. He says precisely here. Later on, he says specifically. Later on yet, he says clear cut. He uses the word thorough. Precisely is what we're talking about now. And I call your attention to that because every once in a while, you know, I'll hear people say that there's many ways to work this program as there are people in it. And that's not accurate. The book is presenting one way. If you want to follow the AA recovery program, do exactly what they said that they did. And again, the book is not written in the you do this and you do that tone. It's written in this is what we did. And so on the very first page, he tells us the purpose of this book is to show you, not to tell you what you should do. It's to show you how we have recovered from this hopeless state of mind and body. And bear in mind, please, that recovered is not the same thing as cured. And since we are on it, let's start it now, because we're going to talk about it later over and over. The difference between recovered and cured. Recovered means the symptoms of my disease are no longer present. That's recovered. The symptoms of my disease, like, for example, let's be obvious, drinking, drugging, that's not a part of my life anymore. Being a source of conflict, confusion, chaos to everybody and everyone around me, everything around me, that's not part of the script anymore. Those are the things that represent my active addiction, but I've recovered from that. I'm no longer in that state of mind. Recovered is different from cured, because cured means the disease itself is no longer present. Recovered, it means the symptoms of my disease are no longer present. Cured means the disease itself is no longer present, and that'll never be the case with us. We're always one bad idea away from waking up the beast, so we've never been cured. So let's continue. He says, for them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. What does he mean by that? Well, hopefully, the reader will not need to go out and prove any of the things that the author is saying about what they did in their active addiction. Don't go out and try things one more time. Don't go out and think you can control your drinking because this one might have gotten away with it once or twice. He's basically saying, hopefully, you can be convinced through identification that you can see yourself in the pages of this book, because as my friend Terry always says, this book is a mirror. It reflects every one of us. So when he says that we hope these pages will prove so convincing, he's just saying, be convinced by the examples we give you. You don't have to go out and try and prove this anymore. Continuing, we think this account of our experiences will help everyone. You may want to underline that word, everyone, to better understand the alcoholic. Please highlight the rest of this paragraph. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. Please underline that word. That's the first mention of it in the book. That is also a new concept, to think of alcoholism as a sickness and to refer to it as such. And besides, we're sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. When Bill uses the term our way of living, he's talking about the steps. And so here he says that alcoholics are not bad people. We're not weak people. We're not immoral people. We have an actual illness. And we are sure that our way of living, our steps, can help everybody, has its advantages for all. There are right now, I believe, according to World Services, over 200 fellowships using our 12 steps. I think they have a record of over 600 that have applied for it, that have requested it. But right now, there are actively 200 some odd fellowships using our 12 steps. So I would say that our way of life has its advantages for all. And even if you're not taking advantage of the 12 steps, our way of living has its advantages for all, because if nothing else, society is better off right now that 125 of us right now are sitting here in this room and not behind the wheel of a car driving to and from a bar or a party. Society is better off because we're here doing this and not doing that. So our way of living does have its advantage for everybody, whether you work the steps, but you or not. You're going to be a beneficiary of our way of life because we're not out driving a car trying to kill people. Okay, continuing. It's important that we remain anonymous because we're too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupation in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. Let's define our terms. Every once in a while, we're going to do that. Avocation means a hobby, as opposed to a vocation, which is a job. This is not a job. This is done, in a sense, as a hobby. Please highlight the next paragraph. It's only 4 lines long. When writing or speaking publicly, please underline that word publicly, maybe underline it a few times. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, that's not here in a group, it's not amongst ourselves, out in the public with a microphone in front of us or a camera in front of us or strangers in front of us. We're talking about when we speak publicly, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, his last name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Somehow, in today's culture, it became anonymity became the same thing as secrecy. It is not. Let me read you what Dr. Bob had to say about anonymity. And Dr. Bob didn't do any writing really, but when he did say things, they had profound effects. Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, Bert, it's on page 264 and 265. I'm going to be reading. But it says, Dr. Bob said there are 2 ways to break anonymity. 1, by giving your name at the public level of press or radio. 2, by being so anonymous that you can't be reached by other drunks. In an article in the February 1969 Grapevine, this guy wrote that Dr. Bob commented on the 11th tradition as follows. This is the quote I'm getting to. Since the tradition of anonymity designates the exact level where the line should be held, it must be obvious to everyone who can read and understand the English language that to maintain anonymity at any other level is a violation of this tradition. So picture, if you will, a piece of paper and draw a line across it in the middle, right? There's the line. We're saying at the point of continuing, Dr. Bob says, the man who hides his identity from his fellow AAs by using only a given name violates the tradition just as much as the AA who permits his name to appear in the press in connection with matters pertaining to AA. So let's return to that paper. We've got a line across the middle of the page. Everything above the line is media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's television, whether it's radio, it's mass communication. That is above the line, and that is against our traditions. Everything below the line or at the line is acceptable. For example, how do I know how to reach you if I don't get your last name? And I'm not saying you need to use your last name at a meeting. Please don't misunderstand. What I am saying is that if some knucklehead tells you you're violating the traditions by using your last name at a meeting, I'm sorry, It's not the case. It doesn't violate the traditions. The group may have a policy at that specific meeting that we don't use last names. That's different. I think that violates traditions also, but be that as it may, we're drawing a line, and anything above the line is a violation of traditions. Anything below the line is not. So continuing, he says, let me again read that last paragraph. I may have lost you. The AA who hides his identity from his fellow AAs by using only a given name violates the tradition just as much as the AA who permits his name to appear in the press in connection with matters pertaining to AA. The former is maintaining his anonymity above the level. Here's the line: above the level of press, radio, films. And the latter is maintaining his anonymity below that line of press, radio, and films, where the tradition states that we should maintain our anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. So if you use your last name at a meeting, and I'm not saying you should, it's up to you. I've been doing it for a long time, because if somebody's looking for Howard, there may be other Howards. So give them your last name. That way you can find people. Okay, back to the book. So much for departure on that page. We're at the bottom of the page. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. See if this sounds familiar, because our preamble, I believe, came from this section of the book. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. Let me pronounce that: fees or dues. And I emphasize that because when I came to my first meeting back in 1983, I heard them say no fleas or Jews, and I didn't care for that very much. So it says fees or dues, okay? Let's be clear. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular sect, faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. You may want to highlight especially that last sentence, that we simply wish to be helpful. Being of help is what this is all about. Helpful to those who are afflicted. Afflicted just means troubled, suffering from a condition, tortured. All that means afflicted, or afflicted means all of that, I should say. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to hear such case. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Now, you may want to underline that last sentence, because originally, in the first edition, first pressing, that sentence was different. What it said was, we wish to try to contact, it says, we should like to try to contact such cases, all such cases. I'm stumbling over that, but we wish, I'm sorry, here, I couldn't even read my own handwriting, I'm sorry. The line originally was, we shall try to contact such cases. So instead of we should like to be helpful to such cases, originally it said, we shall try to contact such cases. And I think you could see why that had to be changed. Sorry about the confusion. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Let's do this. Since I mentioned a moment ago, the preamble. Let's take a minute on that. because the original preamble, which came out in June of 1947, came out in Grapevine. And there's another preamble that was going around before it. It was called the Wilmington Preamble. Andy, do you have that somewhere? I can give you the number of it. I got it somewhere here. Sixth, I think. Now, this was one of many. There were a lot of preambles, but this was one of many, as I said. And there's a couple of points on it that I want to draw your attention to. Uh, and I'll give you the background on this in a minute. But it says in their preamble, the moment he takes so much as one drop of beer, wine, spirits, or any other alcoholic beverage, he automatically loses his status as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, that's pure Oxford group. We're going to be talking about the Oxford group quite a bit in the next few weeks, but the Oxford group was like that. They didn't permit relapses. If you were an alcoholic and you went back out, you stay out because you're not coming back in to the Oxford group. So that was taken out. But there was a line at the end of this that I'm so glad they didn't, they should have put in the current I can't see it there. Where are we? In the current preamble, down at the bottom, Andy, if you can go, there we go. There we go. Nope, nope, go back. There we go. It's underlined and highlighted. At the end of this preamble, it says, we don't speak for AA as a whole, and you're free to agree or disagree as you see fit. In fact, it's suggested you pay no attention to anything that might not be reconciled with what is in the big book. If you don't have a big book, it's time you bought one. Read it, study it, live with it, loan it, scatter it, and then learn what it means to be in AA. And I don't want to take too much more time with that. That's the Wilmington preamble. I'm going to include that when I send out the handouts this week. You'll have a copy of that. So let's go back to where we were. Now, if you have the study version, you got to go back to your fourth edition because we're now going to read something that is not in the study version. This is the forward to the second edition. Forward to the second edition. Nope. Actually,
It is.
did I finish?
Yes.
Yeah, we did. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just got confused here. Let's continue. We're going to be talking about the forward to the second edition. Please note the italic statement underneath the title, if you will, forward to second edition. It says figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Actually, it describes the fellowship as it was from 1939 to 1955. It's almost like a State of the Union. Bill tells what's gone on here between 1939 and when the second edition came out in 1955. And it's interesting that he puts that right up front after the title, but then doesn't really use it until almost the last page in this forward. He doesn't give any facts and figures till almost the end of it. But when he does, please remember the details that he's using. The facts and the figures he's given pertain to the time of 39 to 55. So,
Hey, Albert.
yeah.
Sorry, you didn't quite finish the last paragraph on the last forward to the first edition.
Wait a minute. Let me. I believe I
We
did.
shall be interested. Sorry, am I?
The. I'm sorry.
Uh,
I'm sorry. What the forward? Which,
The
what are you
forward to the
referring
first edition, last page on X1B,
Yeah, inquiry by
XIV.
scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Is that what you mean?
No, we shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I thought I did, and I
Uh,
mentioned what the original
You
wording
did
was.
cover it. You did cover it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry then.
right. It
Forgive
said
me.
that we should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcome. And I pointed out that that sentence, we should like to be helpful to such cases, originally appeared as we shall try to contact such cases. Okay? Sorry about that. Vince, I hope you're okay. Okay, we're back. Forward to the second edition. Since the original forward to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. You may want to highlight that. A wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that, and please underline this, every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Let me read that again. That every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Let's define some terms. Fellowship. If we look it up in the 1938 dictionary I found a definition that I think is perfect. It says fellowship is defined as, and you may want to write this at the bottom of the book page or maybe in the blank area opposite this page, but you're going to need the definition of fellowship because we're going to be using it for the next couple of months. Fellowship, a union of friends or equals sharing common interests, experiences, or purposes. Now, if I drill down a little bit more, where it says sharing common interests, what's our common interest? The solution. So we have a common interest, the solution. We have a common experience. We have a common experience, which is the problem. What brought us in here? We are alcoholics. We share a common experience. And what is our purpose? We share a common purpose, and our purpose is helping others, carrying the message of the 12 steps. So I think that's a perfect description for fellowship because it really covers us quite well. Our common interests is our solution. Our common experiences is having shared in a common problem. And our purpose is helping others, carrying this message. Okay. The sentence I just read, that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Next to it, one of the things, if you're new to my workshops, I have a tendency to bounce around. I like to connect dots all through this book. And we're going to do that here because he made a statement. He said, we hope that every alcoholic who travels will find AA at his destination. Next to that, let's write see page 162, 2. See page 162, 2. And I'll give you a minute to find it. (162) 2. The paragraph says, someday we hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find a fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. And by the time we get to page 162, I'm going to ask you to change the first 5 words. Instead of someday we hope that, change that to today. Today every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. How's that? I don't care where you live, where you are. You throw a stick in any direction and you're bound to hit a meeting. You think Bill ever had any notion of what that was going to be like? Unbelievable. But we've just connected one of the dots. Now let's go back to where we were. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered. You may want to highlight that in orange, recovered alcoholics. The reason, incidentally, that I make an issue of highlighting in specific colors is so that if you go looking for something, if somebody says there are no musts in this book, we highlight musts in green. And if you just flip through the pages, you could show them all of the musts. There are about 150 of them, incidentally. We have an ongoing list. We're always adding to it. So if you want to copy that list, just drop me a line. You got the email address and ask for the must list. But the point is, if you want to look for the prayers or promises, look for the pink highlight. You want to look for the recovered references when some knucklehead says, we've never recovered, we don't use that word. Just thumb through it and look for the orange highlight. And for another term, approach. You see, in today's fellowship, it somehow has become acceptable to take the position of being available to the newcomer. The guy who's got time sitting around in the back, and I'm not going to give him my number. If he wants my help, he'll ask me for my help. That's not what the book says. The book tells me that it is my job to approach the newcomer, to approach the person having difficulty. To approach is my job. So we highlight approach in blue, highlight blue. Okay, back to the book. Sorry, I do have a tendency to get off on tangents, but I'll try and stick to the book. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all the provinces of Canada. AA has flourished in communities in the British Isles, Scandinavian countries, South of Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. Well, you know, it's amazing. In this room alone, how many different nations, countries we represent. It just, Bill would have been overwhelmed. But okay, all told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning. There's an understatement for you. Only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Augury is just a word to indicate signs, indications, predictions. So he's saying that it's a beginning, but it's also a sign of the future ahead. One of the things we're going to do as we go through the forward to the second edition is note the growth of the fellowship. And I'm going to suggest you use a red pen, and in the margin, what I call the inside margin, which is the one nearest the crack in the book. There's the outside margin at the outside of the book, there's the middle, and then there's the outside on the right. But I'm talking about the inside margin next to this paragraph. I'm going to ask that you write June 35. Circle the number 2. I'm getting ahead of myself, but in June of 1935, there were 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. I mean, a couple of million alcoholics around the world. Every one of us have show a direct line, a direct lineage to one of two people. It's extraordinary. It just blows me away when I think about that. And if you don't know your lineage, find out. Find out. I mean, I love to know that my lineage came from Dr. Bob. I came from a pretty good stock. It flowed through Joe Hawk and a couple of other people, but it's amazing to me to know where these things. Mark Houston is in that line. But okay, back to the book. Remember the big book? We're reading it. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker. That New York stockbroker, Bill Wilson. Do you want to write his name above stockbroker? Actually, Bill is being very kind in calling himself a stockbroker. He was actually a kind of a stock speculator. Joe and Charlie have a tendency to describe what Bill did.
Howard, you got muted.
How's that? Joe and Charlie describe what Bill does for a living as selling fast talk to slow thinking people. That's what Bill did. But he's a stock speculator, be that as it may. Between a New York stockbroker, Bill Wilson, and an Akron physician, Dr. Bob Smith. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who'd been in contact with the Oxford groups of the day. I hardly know where to start with this one. 6 months later, the broker had relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. Where it says sudden spiritual experience, you may want to write December 1934 at Towns, Towns Hospital in New York. That's where Bill had his sudden spiritual experience. And he had that experience after a friend came to call on him who had been active in the Oxford groups at the time. That friend's name, the meeting with an alcoholic friend, the friend's name is Ebby, Ebby, Thatcher, Thacher. And they had this meeting in November of 1934 in Bill's home at 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn. Now, Ebby Thatcher wasn't a stranger to Bill. Ebby Thatcher was an old friend of Bill's, an old drinking buddy. Bill said that Ebby Thatcher was the worst alcoholic he ever met. He said, if I ever got as bad as Ebby, I'd have to quit. I couldn't go on living if I was as bad as Ebby. And Ebby got sober. And he got sober and he called on his friend Bill to pass along the program of action that he used to get sober. Now, bear in mind, what I'm reading you is written in 1955. Why is that important? Because he used the words Oxford Group. In the first editions, Bill never made reference to the Oxford Group. And there's a pretty good reason for that. See, the Oxford groups believed in conversion, that they can convert the world to a better place and achieve absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. That you can accomplish those four goals by participating in their spiritual activities. Andy, let's put up 35B, I believe it is. There we go. The Oxford group believed that that people could change their lives if they honestly embraced their program. Now, see if this doesn't sound like our steps. Confidence, that secrets will be kept. Confession, complete honesty about everything. Conviction, owning the seriousness of your sins. Conversion, surrender to God of your own free will. And continuance, helping others to change. That's what the Oxford group was about. Andy, let's go on to 36, the next one. Now, the Oxford group preceded Alcoholics Anonymous, obviously, and the group within the Oxford group that became Alcoholics Anonymous called themselves the Drunk Squad, or were called the Drunk Squad, I should say. And they had those four absolutes of purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love. And the version of the tenets of the Oxford group around 1933 were, see if this doesn't sound like our steps. Give in to God. Surrender. Listen to God's direction. 3, check guidance. That's prayer and meditation, incidentally. 4, restitution. 5, sharing for witness. And 6, confession. And as a comment, in order to keep this thing, you have to give it away. But the point is that this was the Oxford groups that he's referring to. If we go to 37, Andy, you're going to see why Bill didn't want to use the word the Oxford group. The founder of the Oxford group, a guy by the name of Frank Buchman, Buchman, and it's pronounced Bookman. I'm sorry, it's spelled Buchman, it's pronounced Bookman. He decided he wanted to, the world was going down the toilet right before World War II, so he wanted to go to the heads of state of the various European nations and try and get them to convert to the Oxford group's beliefs. And when he came back to New York, one of the places he visited in 1936 was Nazi Germany. And while he didn't get to meet with Adolf Hitler, he did get to meet with Joseph Goebbels, with Goebbels and Speer, Albert Speer, Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, and I believe it was Speer. I may forget the other name, but he didn't meet with Hitler. The point is this: when he came back from New York, he was interviewed in the New York World Telegram, and he said the following: I thank heaven for a man like Adolf Hitler, who built the front line of defense against the Antichrist of communism. Andy, let's look at the next one, 38, the actual article. Thank heaven for a man like Hitler. Now, how's that for a headline in 1936 in New York? Can you see why Bill didn't want to associate with the Oxford group? And here's what Bill has to say about it. Andy, can I have 39? No, you just had it. This is why Bill did not include the words Oxford group in the first edition. He said, I had to ask myself which was more important, that the Oxford group receive credit and that I have the pleasure of so discharging my debt of gratitude, or that alcoholics everywhere have the best possible chance to stay alive regardless of who gets credit. In other words, in 1939, it would be a bad idea to associate yourself with the Oxford groups who had become associated with Hitler because of that quote. So Bill decided not to use the words Oxford group in the first edition. The Oxford group imploded. They changed names. They became other fellowships. They're still in existence under another name. They are less concerned with converting the world to their beliefs. But that's what we're talking about when you could take that down, Andy. when it says on the top of page XVI, was following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who'd been in contact with the Oxford groups of the day. Now you know who the Oxford groups of the day are. You know who the friend is. Ebby Thatcher got sober through the Oxford groups. And he called on his friend. He approached. He didn't wait to be called. He approached his friend Bill Wilson and told him of his recovery. And we're going to be talking a lot about that. But that's what we're referring to here. Continuing, said he had been greatly helped by the late William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. Please highlight and underline this statement. From this doctor, the broker learned the grave nature of alcoholism. In other words, Dr. Silkworth identified the problem for Bill. He defined alcoholism. He defined it as a threefold illness of a mental obsession, a physical allergy, and a spiritual malady. I'm sorry, my phone's going off. Okay, sorry about that. So when Bill was hospitalized in Towns Hospital, the director of the hospital, William Silkworth, and we're going to be reading about Dr. Silkworth very soon. Dr. Silkworth diagnosed Bill, said, "You're not a bad person. You're not an immoral person. You're not crazy out of your mind. You have an actual illness made up of this physical allergy where you cannot consume alcohol without it triggering a response of wanting more and more and more." Allergy is defined as a body's abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. And don't bother about writing it down. We'll come back to it later. And he said, what you have, Bill, is an allergy, an allergic reaction to alcohol. Just like the guy who's allergic to strawberries eats one and immediately breaks out in hives. Well, with you, it's alcohol. And instead of breaking out in hives, you break out in more. All you want is more and more and more. That's a physical reaction. And the reason why you can't stay stopped is because you have a mental obsession that tells you you don't have a physical allergy. See, obsession is a thought which overcomes all thoughts to the contrary. And he told Bill, you have this physical allergy and this mental obsession, and the allergy causes you to drink. The obsession causes you to drink. The allergy causes you to be drunk. And that's what he told Bill Wilson. And that's what we're referring to here. Bill met with Dr. Bob 6 months after his experience at Towns Hospital, which followed his meeting with Ebby Thatcher, who told him about his recovery through the Oxford groups. Let me continue. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Please highlight the rest of this paragraph. Though he could not accept all of the tenets in a 1938 dictionary are defined as opinions, beliefs, views, convictions. So if I use the word convictions or views, maybe it'd make a little bit more sense. Though he could not accept all of the views of the Oxford group, he was convinced of the need for, and let me stop for a minute. What were some of the tenets he couldn't abide by? One, the Oxford group had a leader. I mentioned this guy, Frank Bookman. He was the leader of this thing. We don't have leaders. The Oxford group didn't believe in a lot of things that Bill did. For example, if you were an alcoholic and you joined in the Oxford group and drank, you're out. You're out. There's no coming back from a slip. The Oxford groups also believed that the world was they were a temperance organization. They believed that the world should be free of alcohol. No alcohol anywhere for any reason to anybody. They also felt you shouldn't smoke or drink caffeine. So there's a lot of things about the Oxford groups that Bill couldn't go along with, but that's what he's talking about. Those are the things he couldn't go along with. Not very important compared to the following, the things that he could go along with. And I ask that you highlight it. Now let's number these things. He couldn't accept all the Oxford group tenets. He was convinced of the need for, number one, moral inventory. Sound familiar? Step 4. Confession of personality defects. That's number 2. Confession of defects. Sounds like step 5. 3. Restitution to those harmed. 4. Helpfulness to others. 5. Belief in and dependence on God. Belief in and dependence on God. If it sounds like our steps, you're right, because that's where our steps came from. So these were the spiritual activities of the Oxford group. And that's what Eber had taken advantage of, and Eber was passing along to Bill. Continuing. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he succeeded only in keeping himself sober. Please highlight that. The broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that, and you may want to also underline this, only an alcoholic can help an alcoholic, but he succeeded only in keeping sober himself. Once Bill had a spiritual experience, which we're going to talk about at length later, he wanted to pass it along. He had a vision. He had a vision of hope. When he had that spiritual experience, he had a vision of hope. And if you want to know about his vision of hope, it's called chapter 11 in our book, A Vision of Hope. That's what Bill's vision was. And basically, it was an endless line of alcoholics, one-on-one, helping each other, and then helping another, and then helping another, and helping another. And that can only be accomplished by an alcoholic. Only an alcoholic can get through to an alcoholic, because the message has depth and weight. If you're not an alcoholic, you're telling me something you read, something you studied. It's not something you lived. So it's very easy for me to talk to a non-alcoholic and say, yeah, but you don't understand. That's my favorite expression. You don't understand. Well, if I'm talking to an alcoholic, they will understand. Okay, so continuing. The broker, I wanted to finish the story. That he went around trying to help other people. He was going down to the Bowery in New York. He was going to missions, Salvation Army places, and he was telling these drunks about his spiritual experience. And nobody was interested in hearing about it. So Bill went home and he told his wife that, this isn't working. Nobody's getting well. And she said, yeah, one person is. You are. So why don't you go talk to Dr. Silkworth and tell him what you're doing, and maybe he can help you approach these guys differently. Maybe he can show you how to get through to them, because remember, he got through to you. So Bill went back to Dr. Silkworth, And Dr. Silkworth said, Bill, you're doing it all wrong. You're approaching people, first of all, who haven't asked for your help. You're going up to these people and you're beating them over the head with a spiritual solution. And they have no idea who you are, what you've been through. So what you need to do to get their attention is get their attention through your story. Tell them of your experience. Tell them about that queer mental twist, that obsession. Tell them about what it's like to have this craving, this allergic reaction. And then they will ask you, hopefully, well, how did you do it? If you've done the same as me, how did you get sober? And then you have a right to tell them of the solution you found because they've asked for it. And Bill then went on a business trip right after he had that conversation with Dr. Silkworth. And when this business trip failed, this Akron business trip, he wound up connecting with Dr. Bob. And the thing he did with Dr. Bob was the same thing that Dr. Silkworth told him to do. He didn't beat him over the head with the solution. He told him of his story. They started to have dinner, and Dr. Bob was shaking so badly that Bill said, come on, let's get out of here. Let's go into another room. And they went into another room, and Bill said, you know, buddy, you look like you could use a drink. I know what that's like. Let me tell you about my story. And he told him his story. And they talked for 6 hours. And Dr. Bob came out of that room saying, this is the first guy I ever met and knew what he was talking about alcoholism. Because it was one alcoholic helping another that nobody else could do, like nobody else could do. So that's what we're talking about here when he said that he had succeeded only in keeping himself sober, but then he went to Akron and hooked up with Dr. Bob. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving them greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. Please highlight the rest of this. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must, I guess there are some musts in the book. So let's circle that one in green. He must carry his message, and you may want to carry his message in blue highlighter because it's an approach reference. If I'm carrying something to you, I'm approaching you. So we have two references here. One is a must and the other one is approach reference. So in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician, Dr. Bob. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. You may want to highlight tried spiritual means. See, Dr. Bob was active in the Oxford group, and he recently attended an Oxford group meeting and stood up and declared that he was a hopeless alcoholic and that he didn't see any way out of this. And he declared that to the entire Oxford group. And one of the members of the Oxford group, a woman by the name of Henrietta Seiberling, got him the help that he needed by introducing Bill Wilson to him. And I've just eliminated a whole lot of details here, but we'll come back to that later. But I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what we're talking about. That he tried spiritual means. In other words, he was familiar with the Oxford group's activities, and he tried to do them. But once he did them, he'd celebrate with a glass of booze. And he'd be off and running again and not know why. The guy's a doctor, an MD. He was a proctologist. Thank you. Lost the word. I don't know what my procto is, but I don't want a drunk working on mine. But in any case, he had tried these methods and failed because he never knew what was wrong with them. He would do these things, get some relief, celebrate with a glass of booze, and then he'd be off and running again. So he had tried these things and failed. But, and please highlight the rest of this sentence, when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never been able to muster. Let's go through this. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description, in other words, when he described the problem, when he explained to Dr. Bob about this physical allergy and this mental obsession, the physician began to pursue this spiritual remedy, and that's the solution, with a willingness he'd never been able to muster before. Let's highlight, if you will, the rest of the paragraph, including the 3 lines on the next page. He's sober. That date is June 10th, 1935, incidentally. That was what is recognized as AA's birthday. It was Dr. Bob's last day of drinking. It's a whole different take on that. We'll talk about it at some point later. But we're going to follow what the book says here. He sobered, never to drink again. That, I think, should be highlighted in orange because it's a reference to permanent recovery. You try and use that expression at a meeting, watch out, because every knucklehead is going to be on you. No, we never permanent recover. It's a 1 day at a time program, 24 hours a day. You can achieve permanent recovery. And the book tells me so. He did. It just told me that. He never drank again. He achieved permanent recovery. So above that, you may want to write permanent sobriety. Up to the moment of his death in 1950. If you want to write that down, his death is November 16th, 1950. November 16, 1950. This seemed to prove, and please over-highlight this in pink, one alcoholic can affect another as no non-alcoholic could. In other words, and I'm going to steal this from another fellowship, the therapeutic value of one addict or alcoholic helping another is without parallel. Without parallel. As no alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, let's underline that word, strenuous, something that requires effort. That's what strenuous means, something that's intensive. It requires effort. What it doesn't mean is just going to meetings. That's not strenuous effort. Sorry, that's walking in a door. It's indicated that strenuous effort, one alcoholic with another, let's underline that. And above it, one on one. What we're doing here is similar to that, but it's not the same thing as sitting opposite somebody and working through this book eye to eye, nose to nose, face to face. That's what the book tells us to do. To work with another was vital. Let's underline vital and let's define it, because we're going to be using it a lot throughout the book. Vital is defined as something that is life-supporting, something that is indispensable, something you cannot live without. For example, when you have 2 lungs, you can live with one. So it's not a vital organ. Your kidneys, not a vital organ because you got 2 of them. Your heart, there's a vital organ because you've only got one. Personally, I've lived most of my life not using my brain So that was really considered a non-vital organ anyway, but technically your brain is a vital organ. You can't live without it, even though I did for most of my life. So let me continue. One on another was vital to permanent recovery. Permanent recovery should be circled in orange. 2 references to permanent recovery within 1 paragraph. And that's where we're going to stop today. I'm going to stop the recording. And if there are any questions or suggestions, comments,